Well, I'd have been against it, but they're back. Mark and Mike. It doesn't take a genius.
Welcome back to It Doesn't Take a Genius. This is Mark Ramsey. And again, we just want to put a warning label on this episode. It is going to mention abuse of children physically and sexually. It is going to mention suicide. So please don't listen with kids, and if this episode would traumatize you. But there is a true message of hope in this part 2 of our two-parter holiday episode. You'll want to go back and listen to part 1 for this one to really make sense. But again, this is an interview with an author who survived a lot of trauma and came out with absolute hope. So we hope it is a blessing to you. And again, happy holidays from It Doesn't Take a Genius. She would hit you right away and I mean, there are several times where she just causes a gang to go beat up somebody and beat up you at one point.
Mr. Ramsey. But I don't want to just focus on a lot of the negative stuff because there was that reality and the abuse was absolutely real. It was just I actually want to share while we're here about Kostya. I want to share about him as well real quick. It was one of those times when I did experience a couple of situations where I witnessed death. One of them I watched death, and the other one was I found death. And in this particular case, I wanted to share this story because that's what brought me to a place of being able to forgive my abusers and have compassion for them. At such a young age.
You're going right along with my timeline here, so go right ahead. Yeah, because so we've talked about suffering. Let's talk about hope, endurance, and grace.
How everything else came into place. Thank you, by the way, for giving me the compliment on my subtitle. I was told multiple times by a couple individuals that it's not a regular type of thing to put a subtitle in using the words.
Well, I think it's perfect because.
But I was like, but this the best thing that describes my overall existence.
It describes the story.
It
really
doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah.
So Kostya, because the older boys were in charge and because there was this huge turnover in the orphanage and changes were happening, the new Romanian director was much younger. And we felt like a bunch of us girls could trust him because he just seemed more vibrant and more smiley and more like excited. We came to him we found ourselves in the place where we could trust him and share our the abuses that are happening in the orphanage in that time. So, and you're right, and it spread out. It was just so fast, and it was so explosive. The news spread far and wide very, very quickly. So what happened in that time is a lot of the younger boys knew that they were awaiting prison. It was not a juvenile. There was no such thing in that time for us. It was more like you're going straight to prison because they were already 16. They were already actual adult because in that time for us, 16, you're an adult at age 16.
Okay.
And so in prison, I don't know if many of the listeners know what the Russian prisons are like. They would have to do some of their own research. From what I remember hearing when I was a child, it was brutal.
I can't imagine.
And yes, so somebody would have to do their own research on that. But in that time, what had happened is I was walking from the washing building. Everybody was in the classroom, and I was walking behind the sleeping building. And it was just me and our music teacher coming back in the opposite direction. When we both witnessed some object falling from the 3rd floor building. It was a 3-story building. And as I got closer, I only realized it was a human being. And as I saw, there was blood coming out of the mouth, the body lay deformed on the ground. It was a picture that stuck with me for years. But it was one of those things where I walked up and I had already known he's gone. His eyes were wide open. He was non-responsive. He's gone. And then, of course, the music teacher was like, why are you standing there? Go get help. And I just froze in place. I couldn't move. I was just in a state of shock. Of course, the crowds got bigger. There was more people coming. And before you know it, they announced that he was dead officially. But it was one of those times when on the sidelines, you could hear those kids and those girls from my classrooms and from other classrooms. They were so happy. Finally, he's dead. They were shouting that. They were exclaiming that excitement. When for me, what I saw and it just kind of sort of all clicked at one time for me. Knowing what the prison was like and witnessing his fall and realizing his life just ended. There's no more life. Now he's gone. There's no more living. And so for me, I had like the heart of compassion was born in that time. I did not hate him anymore. I didn't feel any place for anger to be able to hold it against him. I had a lot of compassion for him. Like the only thing that I could ask myself in that time is what could have been done to him to have caused what he caused onto someone else?
Yeah.
What was it that he had to go through? It was those type of things. I was only about 13, 14 years old when I witnessed that. And it was that's when the birth of compassion came in, and realizing that, that it was like forgiveness all in the same time. Like I was instantly forgave because,
This is literally the older student who abused you, and here you see him dead, and just a light bulb goes off.
It was like that. I mean, there was you could see there was a broken alcohol bottle next to him, a smoldering cigarette, and it was like, that's it. He's gone.
He's done this.
He's gone.
Yeah.
His life ended. For some reason, that there was this understanding of me, what life, how special it is to have that life, and what value it held. It didn't matter on what times I grew up and how difficult it was.
Yeah.
I just had that understanding of the value of life. And it just kind of clicked in that same time. For some reason.
Well, and I don't understand, on the surface, I think I have a spiritual understanding, but I don't understand on the surface how a kid survives this. I've worked with youth for 15 plus years, and I've seen some hard stuff, sex abuse and, eating disorders and cutting and so on and so forth, addictions. And I always just sort of go, how did you survive all that? But that's sort of what I wanted to sort of let you close out the podcast. And this may go on for another same amount of time, honestly. But, how did you survive all this? What got you through? You mentioned that moment of, in the book, you say the word empathy, with seeing this dead young man. But there were some other things too.
So there were some things that happened also in my childhood that were outside of the base for what you could see with your own eyes.
Yep.
So before I knew the word God, before I knew anything about, obviously the regime was still a red flag in that time. So we're going to go back a little bit in my history, I guess. It's not in chronological.
Yeah.
But I was about 8 or 9 years old. And again, I was bullied by this individual. This was already in the camp setting. Maybe I was a little bit older. And it was one of those times when we were supposed to be exchanging goods amongst ourselves. Okay, who stole what? Who has what? Let's exchange and things like that. When in fact, it became an ambush. I just got beaten brutally. I can't explain it.
She just sent a gang to attack.
It was just that bad. It was like, 5, 6 kids at a full force. It's no holding back. And so in that time, I just wanted to run away. I didn't want to live anymore. I just wanted to, I had that multiple times in the orphanage where I have made a few times where I ran away from the orphanage. But this was my very first one. And I wanted to run. I knew that there was some sort of a dacha nearby, summer homes for the city folks.
Okay.
With no plumbing or anything like that. So, but we were in the middle of nowhere. We were sort of set in the forest area with the city, I don't know how many kilometers away. Anyway, so I knew I had nothing to look forward to. Then there's that forest ahead of me. And I said, I'm going for it. So I ran. Little did I realize it was a steep drop off there, and I started to roll down. The branches kind of grabbed me on my way. I tripped, and I ended up in a very thick pond, basically. I didn't know how to swim. To this day, I don't know how to swim. Maybe I'll overcome that one day. But no, I started to drown. But it came to a point where I was just so exhausted from fighting that. I was so far from the shore because the shore was like this. It was a wall in front of me. There was nothing to grab onto. And so I started to drown. And it came to a place where I was just in a very peaceful state. I no longer was fighting. I pretty much just let my arms to the side and I just started to sink to the point where I couldn't hear the earth sounds anymore. And it was pitch black. But I call that chapter The Peace at the Depths of Despair, because I was in that such a deep despair. But in the bottom of that pond, I received peace. And it was so peaceful. It was so calm. There was nowhere there to save me, nor to hurt me. It was like, that's it. It was like, for me, it was like, I'm ready, whatever. And I had felt like I was going to die. I was ready to accept whatever came my way in that time. Out of nowhere, just all of a sudden, this power started pushing me back up from under my feet. It's a power I cannot explain, Mr. Ramsey. It was just the most, I mean, to this day, my faith is extremely strong because of that miracle that took place in my time.
Pushed you right out.
It pushed me right back to the top. But this time I was already on the other side of the pond because I was fighting and I didn't realize how much I drifted to where there was something I could grab onto and pull myself on the edge. And there I laid. I moved to the fields. I was taken by the beauty. It was as if like I was seeing earth for the first time. I was seeing sky for the first time and the sun. And I just wondered what was beyond that exists, that is so powerful, that is capable of this. I couldn't put a name to it for a long time, for many years, because there was no name for it. It was just something that I knew that existed. For whatever reason, it saved me. I went back to the orphanage, just recalling the experience. It gives me goosebumps. But I went back to camp, and I was ready to take on whatever came my way because I knew there was a power that existed that is beyond and out of this world. No matter what happens, it already saved me once. It was like, so that I have held, that experience I have held dear to my heart. To this day, no matter what obstacle I have come to, no matter what hardness I've come to, I know that there's nothing. Except the only difference is the missionaries started coming to the orphanage. And they started sharing about, stories about this guy named Jesus. I'm like, oh, okay, well, who's this guy named Jesus that's capable of what again? Did you say loving unconditionally? Like loving it. There is a man that existed that is capable of loving unconditionally. You better believe it, Mr. Ramsey. I was like 14 years old. If you have teenagers, I have almost 4 teenagers. Skepticism, questioning, all of that even existed in us orphans in that time, in that age. So you better believe it. I have already experienced so much of harshness of reality in life. I questioned everything. I was like, no, how could this really exist? Is there such a man that is capable of such? So that was the first time I heard about Jesus Christ and God and the stories. I think what kept me close in that time, that helped me to hold on to what missionaries brought with them, apart from bringing great bread, because this was around Easter time. They brought sweetest bread ever. It was amazing. Apparently it takes them 7 days to bake it.
Oh, really?
Prior to Easter, actually. I didn't know that. You have to let it sit for a long time. But apart from that, they also brought oranges. And because there were so many of us, they had to cut them up. And we got that little sliver. But let me tell you.
You got a slice.
It was the best thing ever. It was the first time I actually tasted a fruit of that,
less citrus style fruit.
It was like, wow, this stuff is so good. But apart from that, they brought the great news of Jesus Christ with them. It was the music and the songs I gravitated towards. The stories were there. I was fascinated to hear them for the first time. It grabbed onto me, but only for a short minute. I mean, because then I was like, I like it. It almost felt like a fantasy for a minute. Because I'm still living in this harshness of reality.
Right.
I mean, I still need to figure out where we're going to eat today. It was that bad. I mean, stealing clothes and stealing food just to get through, the very basics.
And you mentioned another incident that you described as a miracle. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. It was the same thing. Basically, we were playing Frisbee, and it's the same thing. She ordered they all gained up on me.
You accidentally hit her with the Frisbee.
With the Frisbee in the face, but she felt like maybe it was on purpose. Who knows what it was?
Right.
But I just know that they gained up on me immediately. And it was already like the month of December at 10 o'clock at night. Ugh. I mean, it was late in the wee hours of the night. And so I wanted to run. I remembered my classmate Ola. She came in later. She was also coming from a very abused background, but she would tell me like, Lilia, it's only so many kilometers, 40 kilometers to Bielsa, to the big city. You can do it, because she did it so many times. She would run away and come back, and she would run away, and then one of those times when she ran away, she never came back. She disappeared. But I was like, I can run away. Sure, I can. It's only 40 kilometers. So anyway, the cold and the blizzard didn't faze me in that way. It was like, it didn't even like compute in my head. I was just ready to run, just to leave that forsaken place once and for all.
Yeah.
And I was much, much older this time. I was about 14, 15 years old. Actually, I was 15 years old. And no, I apologize, 14 years old. And so when I took off running this time, I mean, it was blizzard, and it was cold, and it was brutal. And I mean, I had no hat, no gloves, just the coat, and running down. When cars were very rare where we grew up, if you see a car, it was more like because of the city folks nearby, or into the orphanage, they would arrive only because if there's like a certain special official coming in or something to check on the how the things are run and things like that. So, but mostly our village operated on horse and buggy. So that's how I grew up. So I relate to a lot of like the 40s and the 30s and maybe even earlier, like a House in the Prairie.
Yeah, Little House on the Prairie.
Little House in the Prairie.
That seems familiar.
I relate to that quite a bit. So anyway, so this car, there was an institute that sat, like a college, that sat behind the orphanage, but then there was living buildings for the village folks. And then behind that, there was a building of institute. It's like a college.
Okay.
For older kids that leave. There was 2 institutes that village had. Once you become 16, those were the 2 options you had. And so, I made a run for it. When this car coming towards me, all suddenly, it was just the beaming red lights, the brake, and the screeching of the sound of the brakes that came on so harsh. As I heard them driving by with their drunkenness, I knew what drunkenness was. I knew what danger was, because it was not hard anymore for me to detect.
Right.
And so, when there's foolishness going around with drinking and things like that.
Yeah.
So, and that's what it was, one of those times when I detected it, I sensed it. And in that time, I remembered horror stories of girls disappearing quite often. And so when that flashed before my eyes, I heard that voice loud and clear that said, run. And so I didn't run towards on the road. I actually crossed the road and it went towards like the institute building, but the residential building where the villagers lived nearby. And so I don't know if a lot of the listeners know, but if you look at the architecture of Russia in the Soviet times, all of their heating pipes are actually above ground. And some of them are really like 9-10 feet up in the air. When you ever visit, you will see that nothing is under the ground. Maybe they didn't have the resources to be able to put them under the ground in those times.
Okay.
Who knows? Everything was above ground. So as small as I was, and this as dark as it was, and I am through 3 feet of snow. I am trying to make my way through this heavy, thick snow, and I fell over the thing. Tripped, hurt my foot or something, my ankle. But as I ran into the building, and I can hear them, they're not far behind me. As I'm running to the building, each floor has 4 leather padded doors. Because they were soundproof. They wanted leather doors because they were soundproof, and it was part of insulation too, to keep it warm, so there's no draft coming in. So I'm trying to knock. You can't knock on these leather doors. It's impossible. So I'm just screaming and trying to get their attention in the best way I could. Each floor, and there was nothing until, and I'm climbing. This is my 5th floor by now, at the very, very top of the 5th floor, as I can hear them still climbing up the stairs. I just screamed so hard and I knocked so hard when this very last and final door opened. I'll never forget this experience. It's the very last and the final door. And I'm like there, and I'm in the shock because it was the director of the orphanage, the new director. I didn't know where he lived. And I was like, wow. He just grabbed me by my shoulder, shoved me in, shut the door, closed it. And I couldn't get over that.
Wow.
I mean, I twisted my ankle and I broke it even, and I got punished after that. I had to do
Yeah.
1,000 sit-ups.
Uh-huh.
That was one of the punishments.
Yep.
We had to do a heavy chair above
With
our
a
heads.
chair over your head.
Yep. Not on the head.
Yeah.
Over the head.
Holding it
You
up.
had to hold it up because our head would have been a little bit more, too much support. So, yeah, I was in this state of disbelief that once again, this great power saved me. And because I was like, of all the people, it was the very, and of all the doors, it was the very last door, how many doors I hit, 4 times 5 floors to get up there. It was amazing.
So another side of this, you're talking about how, it was sort of a culture that said just what you can experience with your 5 senses. That's all there is, just this material world. And you're getting these tastes that there's got to be something else. You get these, you've called them miracles. You also had these sort of moments of kindness from people in your circle, I guess. You talk about the villagers.
Sure. So missionaries were definitely a set of of people that came and showed us the kindness that extended, but it also came with that gift of sharing about Jesus Christ and the stories that came with that. That was amazing. But throughout my entire childhood, the only way I could cope with a lot of these things was one of them. I was always fascinated by the fields, by the green grass. I found myself free out there. That was my way of coping with reality and the harshness of reality, as I was always gravitated towards nature. To this day, I still am. But one of the other things was there were so many times when I wrote my book. Yes, I have written my book in that visceral experience where you are literally in my shoes and you're experiencing everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and with no intellect. There's no explanation of any kind. It's just you are literally experiencing everything under the sun that I went through in that time. So, I mean, when I say visceral experience, that's what it is.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense in the book, and it doesn't make sense to a kid who went through it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but if I had written this book 30 years ago, and even 20 years ago, it would not have come out the way it did come out today. And the reason I included those memories of the kindness that took place, obviously it was my way of coping with reality, but it was recognizing and realizing what I like to call them God highlight moments today was I began, I wanted to add a little bit, I began a journey of emotional healing 6 years ago with Murray Method. And I've tried a lot of different Christian counselors, trainings for emotional. I needed to deal with my traumas. And they gave a lot of great tools. Everything that I received, they were okay, but on the surface. And it only worked for a short minute, for a short time. It helped me, don't get me wrong. I mean, I wouldn't be the mom I am today if I didn't have those tools then. But 6 years ago, when I came across this particular program, it was a life-changing experience because I wasn't just dealing with traumas on the surface. I wasn't just dealing with the issues on the surface, issues with kids, marriage, life, things like that. It wasn't just like peeling away layers of onions. It was like, cut the onion and go right in the center.
Is that right?
It was that kind of experience for my emotional health that we went through on this particular journey. Let me tell you, Mr. Ramsey, it was eye-opening, life-changing to where it allowed me to dive in all the way to the bottom from the very beginning of my nest, which was my birth, which was my earliest memories would be the crib. That's how I began my book. And granted, if I would have written that book 20 or even 6 years ago, it would not have come out balanced the way it is today if I didn't go through that emotional healing process and the traumas that I dealt with. I dealt with it in a way where you dive in and you start right there at the very bottom and then you slowly climb back up. My quote, "How low one will go,"
I wanted you to say that.
Describes exactly that, is how high they will fly. So if you're willing to go to the very bottom, to the very nest, your very original birth self, your earliest memories, that if you're willing to go that far and just deal with everything that happened along the way as you were growing up, Literally, that's how high you will fly.
So I have a client who says, if you name it, you can tame it. And I wonder if that's a little bit related here. You're going low to grab hold of all the things that you've had to deal with, but that lets you release that and go high.
Yes, and that's what, because it evens out. It gives its balance, actually. And so, yes, I have written that. And so some of the things were the kindness of people that I met along the way on my earliest childhood journey. Whether it be a random hospital, veterans hospital, that one man saving me from potentially being abused by another man for sexual abuse. Experiencing the kindness of the people that would come and visit their moms. I was in the hospital in and out a lot my whole childhood. I was malnourished. We were all malnourished.
Yeah, right.
But me particular, I was in the hospitals in and out because for some reason I just would pass out a lot. I would lose a lot of consciousness and things like that. So there was a lot of time I spent in the hospital. But in that time is what taught me to see what an aunt was, an uncle, a grandma, a grandpa. It was like for the first time I was seeing those titles being used.
Yeah.
I never knew what that was even. But in that time, and they would bring treats. They would bring treats for their family members at the hospital, and they would treat me likewise. So there were moments. As I wrote this book, I wanted it to, each chapter, to have obviously the harshness of reality, but I wanted to balance out with the goodness that existed also in that time. And so I like to call them God highlight moments, is when you're in that time of your experience, bad trauma experience, what is it that helps you to survive or helps you to overcome that particular moment, helps you to survive, no matter how bad it got into what level. There was something that interrupted that particular time that still allowed you to live. And so as I was writing the book and as I was working on my emotional traumas for the last 6 years, I've been on this emotional health journey. I have come to a place where I have so much stored up work where I've revisited those places in that time, reliving it again, this time psychologically, emotionally, mentally. I'm reliving that again. But I'm revisiting and recognizing all the different moments where God intervened on my behalf and helped me to survive and to overcome.
That had to have been very hard work.
I'll tell you what, Mr. Ramsey, not many people want to go back and revisit. A lot of, okay, so I have had so many people, two main questions always stand before me when I meet with the readers that have read my book. Okay, one of the questions is like, Lilia, I don't understand you. How does one, and this is coming from believers too. This is not just from non-believers, but this is from believers. How is it that you how do you come to a place of forgiving all these abusers? I mean, they have done you wrong. They have done, and rightfully so, one has the right to, we're only human beings, right?
Yeah.
Rightfully so, we have the right to be angry, resentful, and bitter, and all of those things. That particular situation that happened to me with Costel, that particular one followed me my whole life. So no matter how difficult things got, I was still able to come to a place where my heart didn't harden to the point where I had to return back the worstness of what has done someone. Do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. It was, I would like to be able to return it with that, but don't do unto others as it was done to you. Do you see what I'm saying? So
this is, we're talking about the gentleman who committed suicide, that
it was
image and that.
It was like the birth of my being able to not harness a lot of the anger and bitterness. They came as life still went on in the orphanage. I was still experiencing all of the harshness and even after the orphanage. So, and as life continued, it allowed me to be able to keep that heart soft and not, I'm not saying that I never became resentful or bitter, but it didn't come to a place where there's normally two ways that one copes with these type of traumas. Is they'll either become the abusers themselves or they become the opposite, right? There's really almost no middle ground here. And so for me, for whatever reason, God has granted me that grace where I was able to be on the other side and not become the abuser myself unto others. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that alone, I even recognize as grace in my life, that I've been able to receive that.
To hold on to the lesson of that terrible moment. And you mentioned another thing that you often get as a question, and I'm going to predict that this is sad. This is really hard to read. I don't know that I can finish this.
Yes. Well, because not many people want to revisit that. I've had people ask me, how do you
I'm going to put a warning on this podcast just to, because I know that this will be triggering for people.
Absolutely. The book itself could be triggering for people. Absolutely. I mean, this is real. This is real stuff.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I realized that even 6 years ago, because I've had those multiple times where I was experiencing counseling, but it was just I almost felt like it was not going anywhere. It was not getting me to where I needed to be almost. I felt like I was being stuck or things are recirculating. It just keeps coming back. Something is just not being worked through. I'm not saying I have not been emotionally healthy until the last 6 years.
Wow.
Up until then, I mean, I just pretty much survived and coped with and however way it triggered me is however way I responded. Did I have any understandings of knowings of any of this? I had no idea.
Yeah.
I didn't know how one thing can affect. In fact, many people don't know how their childhood upbringing can affect of who they become today.
Right.
They don't. And so for me, it was one of those things where I didn't have family in that time. I didn't have family of origin or anything like that. But I wanted to really deal with if things were kept coming up and it's always escalating out of control. I wanted to come to a place where why can't we just dive in all the way? And so when my counselor said, Lilia, so Murray method would require you to, she kind of prepared me for it. And she gave me some of the examples. For example, your heart, your emotional aspect of you, it's like a cup of water, and it fills up and it fills up and it fills up. At some point, it starts to expel itself through the top of the rim because I mean it's overflowing. And so what happens in our physical state is we're experiencing and we're keeping it in, we're keeping it in, but it starts to expel through us, whether we're getting sick, whether we're expulsion, anger, and things like that. It comes out through us one way or another. And so she gave me that little example of how traumas may work and your upbringing of your childhood may work. And in that time when I said, this is what I said to her, counseling? No, who needs that? I don't need that. I said it in such a way where I was like, I don't need that. I'm perfectly fine. I got Jesus Christ by my side. I mean, what could else be wrong? Because that's one of the things that people bring up all the time. I've got Jesus Christ by my side. Yes, Jesus Christ is what gave me the groundings for my faith. That experience gave me, everything is connected in a way. This particular program, it's God-centered to where allow me to dive all the way into the center of it and bring everything back up on the surface so I can be a healthy, balanced adult today. But God-centered.
Interesting.
Because there's 4 main pillars of our existence: emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and physical. And so emotional was where I was lacking a great deal. Spiritual I mean, that miracle and the bottom of the pond, faith followed me all the way through my life. I've always had that. I have had strong faith no matter what came my way. I've always been a very optimistic individual in that regard. Physical, fine. Intellectual, as much as I can grasp would be great for today, right? But emotional, I was lacking in that area so much. And actually a lot of people lack in that area. And it kind of helped me to bring everything onto the surface. That's why that quote came up in me in that time. I was going through a lot of growth, a lot of healing, a lot of, and that helped me to, and that's what it was born in me in that way. I realized I dove in all the way to the bottom. And I realized how high I was flying in that time when I finally was dealing with issues and the healing came and restoration came. and a healthy balance perspective came. And it was just like, yes, I know how to set boundaries now. Yes, I know how to say no to someone. Yes, I know how to like this, and that. I was just very, very, it was just clear, and it was not difficult to do anymore.
Yeah.
And it did come very clear and very like punctual. So
it's funny, because you're talking about it, and we're just barely scratching the surface of a few of the things, like, like saying no and having boundaries. Like that's a
whole other topic we could have.
Yeah, but it radiates out of the fact that there were some things you had to deal with to be able to have those healthy behaviors. And
Yes.
that's what, I think Mike and I were kind of interested to have you on the podcast because, we have plenty of people who are wrestling with stuff from long ago, and here they are in a workplace, and suddenly unhealthy behaviors are showing up, and hey, this is just my behavior, right? This is just my culture.
That's
But
just who I am.
you can dive below that and deal with
If
some
one
things.
wants to be able to address and see how things are triggering them today per se, I mean, if they're ever interested, absolutely, there is programs out there. This particular program is what did for me. I mean, it was life-changing experience. It helped me understand a lot of the psyche and how all that works. To be able to connect the dots, it was absolutely amazing. And number one for me, God-centered.
Yeah, sure.
That was number one for me.
Sure. Especially after what you had experienced miraculously in the early days.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure people know how to buy the book. We'll put a link to, what do you want, the Amazon link? Is that the best way to do it?
Sure, for now.
Okay.
I do have my webpage and things like that, but Amazon is where it's available right now.
Okay.
It's easier to keep up with Uncle Sam when it's time to pay.
That's fair.
I'll be sharing that on my next podcast. Earning my first paycheck at McDonald's, only to find out, $1,000, 200 of that just went to Uncle Sam.
that $1,000 is
I'm
not
like, I thought
$1,000.
Uncle Sam was a friendly guy, but anyway, that was something.
Well, and I do want to just tell people there is a really cool part 2 to the story that I know just a little bit about, and you get a little taste of it in the book. The book is worth reading. So for folks listening, Lilia Klaczynski, Lilia Klaczynski, Klaczynski, Open Fields and Iron Curtains.
Thank you.
We'll put a link to Murray Method too. We'll put that in. Is there anything else you want to share before we close? Or I think we've covered it, honestly. But
I was going to share my Bible verse, but I can't remember where my papers are. I'm sorry. But
Fair
that's
enough.
okay.
Fair
Sorry.
enough.
No, I do want to share something with my listeners. You can edit the other part out.
Okay.
I do want to share something with my listeners really quick. I have had a lot of people also would come to me, and most times when I'm sharing my stories, they would say something like, "Oh, you had it far worse than I did." They're undermining their experiences and their harshness or their hardships that they've endured as well.
Yeah.
And so I always encourage when somebody expresses that, I would always say, this was my story I lived through.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have your journey that you have overcome as well.
Yeah.
And so I want to encourage listeners to be able to, the whole point of sharing this story is so that they can take the time and dive into their own selves and revisit maybe some of the places, obviously with a healthy counselor nearby, and to be able to overcome their, but so that they don't undermine what they've gone through.
Yeah.
Mine is not worse than somebody else's. Mine was just mine. It was the journey that God brought me on. So
And they're different, but they still matter. Whatever your story
they
is, it
still
matters.
matter.
Yeah.
Of course, American public is mostly fascinated. When I share with the Russian public, majority of them already know. They've all lived through it. But when I shared with the American public, it was just such vast difference in cultures.
Yeah.
So they are very fascinated to hear all these growing ups and upbringings. It's like, wow, did this really exist in your time of growing up? Yes, it did.
Yeah.
But you had your own growing up to do, and you had your own difficulties, and you had your own. So for me to share this is for you to take the time to acknowledge yours.
I love that. That's a great place to end it. That's a challenge to every person listening to this, including me. So thank you for doing this, Lilia.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Ramsey.
And that's
Always
it.
call me.
Join us next time when you'll hear Mike say, well, I'm sure he'll say something pithy. Don't miss it next time it doesn't take a genius.
That's good enough.